Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi man wala. So I had a very complicated childhood. I think everyone had a complicated childhood to some extent, but a lot of my childhood plays out in my work today. So I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana. I grew up in the United States. And, you know, my parents being, the Palestinians in diaspora that ended up in Louisiana, met in Houston actually, and ended up in Louisiana. You know, they both played very distinct roles in my religious formation. My father was someone who is deeply scholarly. He's technically speaking, a distinguished professor in chemistry, but he actually taught in Medina in the late 50s and early 60s. Deeply scholarly individual, deeply committed to building institution, to debating on behalf of the Palestinian cause. And so I grew up watching my father giving khutbahs, debating on university campuses. Often it would be he being the lone Palestinian voice, debating on behalf of the Palestinian cause, and really being taken aback by his command of the knowledge that he had, the authority of the knowledge that he had, the depth that he had, his unquestioned commitment to the two causes that I saw him working hard towards, which were the cause of Islam and then the cause of the liberation of Palestine. And he also played the role of sort of the wise man in the community. So my dad's a no drama person. He absolutely is allergic to drama. And so he was always the arbitrator in the community. So all the late night arbitrations and solving problems between people happened in my house growing up, because he never took sides. He was never a groupie. And so he was always kind of the guy that everyone came back to. So he played that role. And then my mom, Allah yarhamha, my mom, I have a whole lecture on her. Her story is really one that I feel like there could be a biography written about her. Because my mom grew up in Bethlehem, in Bethlehem. She, deeply spiritual person, completely, did not have like a religious background. Could have been anything from a Catholic nun to a professor in Lebanon. She studied at AUB, Arabic literature and poetry. She was kind of, she really explored everything quite richly. And subhanAllah, she ended up becoming the most devout Muslim that I ever met in my life, like just from a spiritual perspective. Deep spiritual connection, humanitarian. She wrote poetry, Arabic poetry about Palestine, about the refugees, coming from Bosnia and things of that sort. And she got very sick. So my mom struggled with cancer her whole life. She had 4 strokes. I shouldn't say her whole life, I'd say my whole life. From my childhood, her cancer started to act up suddenly out of nowhere. She had 4 strokes, the last of which took her life. She was not supposed to give birth to me. So knowing that your existence already was like called into question. I have one sibling, one older brother, and my mom's health issues started after that, and she was told she'd never be able to have children. And when she was pregnant with me, she actually had numerous blood transfusions. And back then they couldn't scan blood. So they said, well, maybe the blood has HIV. That was the beginning of the, sort of the AIDS generation and things of that sort. So all things are going to go wrong. So I was expected, first of all, I wasn't expected at all. Secondly, to be a highly complicated pregnancy or delivery. Alhamdulillah, Allah Azza wa Jal, saw me through that. But I saw her struggle my whole life. And so half of my life was spent in the hospital, watching my mom struggle through the next health challenge. But she dealt with it with such grace, and not only such spirituality and grace, but selflessness. Like she was constantly concerned about other than herself. So seeing those two forces in my life was very important to me. But I had bitterness. I actually became an agnostic as a teenager. I had questions about God. Why would, when you talk about like the stories of Ayyub alayhi salam, I looked at my mom and I was like, this is a woman that reads Quran nonstop. This is a woman that prays and fasts and is all about charity. No one in the community could say anything bad about her. Why is she going through this? And it gave me deep questions about faith. And she was never questioning faith. I was questioning it. So we were highly exposed to devastation because we always had refugees in our house and things of that sort. And then I was exposed to that personal devastation with my mom, and her health challenges. And so it led me to a place of, I think, embracing an abnormal childhood, but also already feeling left out. I was the only Muslim in my school, went to public school. Being a child of Palestinian descent didn't really matter, because in Louisiana, everyone's sort of racially ambiguous. So I went to an all-black school, but in Louisiana, people have very different complexions. So I could kind of fit in from a racial perspective, but from a religious perspective, I was already kind of the odd one out. So it led me to a point of, what's the point? I can be a good person without faith. So I never saw myself not taking the path of charity, but I did lack clarity about faith. And what that led me to was a bunch of Ahmadidat books, a bunch of churches, going to different churches, going to even synagogues, and at one point a Buddhist temple. Just as a 13-year-old, by the way, as a 13-year-old, I was secretly studying religion, but different religions. And and I was already at that point where I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna look around and see what's out there. And so my best friend, his name was Joshua. I played basketball, Joshua played football. I'm 6'5", if you've seen me in person. Joshua's 6'5" too. And we were sort of like the overgrown teenagers that looked 25 when we were 14 and 13 years old, because of how big we were. And so he and I were best friends, first grade. We said, let's study religion together. His uncle was a pastor. He was asking questions too, meaning Joshua. I was asking questions about faith. So he said, we're going to actually study religion together, and not with my father not knowing, my mother not knowing. We had actually agreed as teenagers that we're going to be the same religion together. So we're going to study religion together, open-minded, and we're going to come to a conclusion. So alhamdulillah, we came to Islam. He became Yusuf, suffered being ostracized from his family. I got close to religion. He literally, became like a son to my dad. So we all call my dad Pops. He's the third brother in our family. He literally was taken in, in the sense like my dad embraced him as a son. He embraced my father as a father, and he is our brother. And subhanAllah, after that, I just said, you know what, I'm going to dedicate myself to the study of Islam. So I skipped 2 grades of high school, tested out of 2 grades of high school, alhamdulillah, and was able to begin my journey of studying Islam.